Welcome, everyone. Happy Thursday.
Happy Thursday.
Feel free
Thursday
to,
already.
oh yeah, the week is flying. Feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat with your name and where you're from as people are trickling in from the waiting room. All right, I'm seeing Idaho, DC, Minnesota, Oregon, Texas, LA, DC, more Oregon. All right, now they're coming in too fast for me to keep up with, but seems like we've got people from all over the country. Great to see. All right, we'll get started in about 30 seconds or so. I think the waiting room is slowing down a bit. New Jersey, that's my home state.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining. My name is Courtney Cooperman. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a housing advocacy organizer here at NLIHC. Thank you so much for joining the second webinar in our two-part mini-series, Housing is Built with Ballots, Organizing to Win Affordable Homes at the Ballot Box. As a reminder, this webinar is being recorded, and the recording and resources will be sent out tomorrow in our weekly email announcements, The Connection. Comes out around 1 p.m. Eastern. And as a reminder, you can put questions in the Q&A box. It makes them a little bit easier to find for us. Next slide. So as you may know, last year, NLIHC tracked nearly 100 housing-related ballot measures in the November 2022 midterm elections, and these ballot measures were overwhelmingly successful. We have a summary of those ballot measures and an analysis in a report that we published last December called Voters Choose Housing, and my colleague Sid just dropped that link in the chat. We also published a report earlier last year on tips for organizing effective ballot measure campaigns. The case studies are from 2020 and 2021. But the takeaways are really universal and can be applied for any campaign going forward. So overall, it was really clear from these reports that voters said yes to affordable housing at the ballot box across the country. And from these successes, it's perhaps not surprising that more than a dozen cities and counties are seeking to enact housing solutions through ballot measures in the 2023 elections. So we can go to the next slide. Actually, on both the next two slides, there's a quick snapshot of some of the cities that have measures related to housing and homelessness on the ballot in the elections on November 7th. And this is on top of some ballot measures that have already passed earlier this year in special and local elections. Our research on all of these is ongoing, so if you know of a ballot measure that you're not seeing on the screen, please drop it in the chat or email it to me. And if you're in a city that's listed here, if you would like more information on any of these ballot measures, you can also feel free to reach out. But regardless of whether you live in a city where there is a ballot measure directly related to housing and homelessness, the outcomes of state and local elections have a really big impact on housing policy in your community. So it's important to make sure that you're registered and have a plan to vote in every election, even elections in odd-numbered years like this one that tend to get less media attention. So in that spirit, today we are celebrating Vote Early Day, which is a nonpartisan civic holiday dedicated to promoting early voting opportunities. We know that long lines at the polls, voter disinformation, and confusing election laws all have a disenfranchising impact that disproportionately affects low-income voters. Early voting provides the opportunity to overcome these obstacles and ensure that everyone can cast their ballots with confidence. Millions of Americans have options to vote ahead of Election Day by mail or in person. We encourage you to learn more about your state-specific early voting rules, and you can find those on the Vote Early Day website, which Sid just dropped in the chat. Vote Early Day is also partnering with Lime to offer free scooter and e-bike rides to the polls during the early voting period. And we'll drop a link where you can learn more about that opportunity. Next slide. So today's webinar is a really great chance to learn more about some of the organizing that made the ballot measure victories of 2022 possible, and a look ahead to exciting ballot measure campaigns that are already underway for 2024. To bring us these insights, we have a really all-star panel of 4 leaders that were recently involved in 2022 campaigns or are actively involved in 2024 campaigns. We have Angelina Cornejo, Campaign Strategy Coordinator at East Bay Housing Organizations in California. Emily Martinick, who's a housing advocate with Residents United Network of Los Angeles, among a number of other grassroots groups. We have Madeline Hammerlund, who's a housing campaign organizer with Our Future Starts at Home in Minnesota, and Zach Martinez, who is legal counsel and policy advisor at Gary Community Ventures in Colorado. Each of them will open us up with a few minutes talking about their ballot measure campaigns, and then we'll turn it to the full panel for a Q&A. So if questions are coming up throughout, please feel free to put those in the Q&A box. And with that, I will turn it over to Angelina.
Hello, everyone. Angelina Cornejo from East Bay Housing Organizations, Campaign Strategy Coordinator. I use she, her pronouns. Next slide. So I'm here to talk about a really exciting thing we're doing up in the Bay Area. We are working together to put a bond on the 2024 measure, and this is a 9-county regional bond. And how are we doing this? It's by centering grassroots coalition building, racial and economic equity, and community leadership. Next slide. And so some of our goals are to win like a systemic change and unlock billions of dollars, build a coalition, a big tent of people who are housers and ranges of sectors and partners and interests, and also like invest in grassroots organizing across the region to create a long-term housing agenda and a mechanism to fund the much needed housing in the Bay Area. Next slide. So this has been going on since 2018. We have been working on creating this model. It all started back in 2018 with a bunch of partners coming together to create an idea of how we can generate funds for the 3 Ps. It involved a New York trip. New York has a housing funding mechanism that the Bay Area leaders were wanting to learn from, created a bunch of different types of campaigns, and leading up to AB 1487, which created the entity Bay Area Housing Finance Authority. And it's a new legal entity, and it established a whole governing body and mechanisms and guardrails about how the agency could function. And then in 2020 and 2021, the BAFA received its first allocation of money, and that was a $20 million state appropriation that was secured through the coalition that we're a part of, which is Bay Area Housing for All. And then most recently, they hired Kate Hartley as the director. And this is when the regional agencies, along with the coalition, have come together to start advocating and exploring a housing measure in November of 2024. Next slide. And so one of the things that I think Abram, actually, if you tuned in last session, Abram Diaz from Nonprofit Housing was talking about was ACA1. ACA1 is a statewide ballot initiative that had to go through the legislature to be placed on the ballot that would reduce the threshold required to pass local affordable housing bonds to 55%, putting it on par with school bonds. That passed the legislature, and there will be some cleanup that will be happening next year. And if everything goes according to plan, there will be 2 mechanisms on the ballot. One being to lower the threshold to 55%, and second would be the regional bond. And the good thing about that happening in that way is that if it passes at 55, if the statewide lowering passes, then the regional bond could pass at that 55% threshold. And we've seen this in the Bay Area, that even places like Berkeley had a hard time this time around in 2022 passing their ballot. They actually gained more than 55%, but failed to meet the 66%. So this is sort of like the two powerful steps of how we're trying to get towards solving the housing crisis. And that's a very exciting thing that happened. Next slide. And so this is who we are. So we are just the Bay Area Housing for All Coalition is a huge coalition. EBHO, East Bay Housing Organizations, is one part and one key component of it. And we are like leads in the county, in Alameda County and Contra Costa County. But as you can tell, there's a lot of people who are vested in this, and it keeps growing day by day. Next slide. And so what is it? What are we trying to do? So this is the 10 to $20 billion 9-county regional bond. So that's what we are pushing for BAFA to put onto the ballot. And yeah, we're super excited about this, and we know that all that money could have a large lasting effect. Next slide. And in like having an impactful solution. So like if a $10 billion bond passes, it could create produce and preserve 45,000 affordable homes, and half of those going to house 500,000 of low-income households, and create jobs, and be able to leverage the money for additional resources. And a $20 billion bond would double that impact. Next slide. Oh yeah, sorry. Next slide. So this is the timeline of where we are now. We have done so much work, and we've been doing this intentionally because we know that it's a long track ahead. So right now we're still in the building capacity feasibility stage. It's not even going to go onto the ballot until June 2024. The filing deadline technically is August. So we have been in this phase one part of the campaign where we are building a big tent. We're securing endorsements. We just launched our elected official endorsements. We're developing our infrastructures. We're telling the stories like I'm doing now, and all of this to create excitement and for when it actually gets placed on the ballot. And then so it's like a whole timeline of the campaign, and we're still early, but we've been doing a lot of work to position us better to pass the bond in all 9 counties. Next slide. How to get involved. So if you're in the Bay Area and you're interested in learning more, this is just a brief overview of it. I could talk your ear off about this. Contact me. My name is Angelina again, and my email's there. If you have any questions, I know we're putting it in the Q&A. Feel free to put Q&A questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Angelina. Great to see that there's a concrete step for people who are in the region and want to get involved. I'll make sure to send out your email and that link as well. Thank you so much. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Emily.
Hi, everybody. It's great being here, and I'm so glad to see all the people that came. I'm a Corporation for Supportive Housing Speak Up advocate, but I'm also a Residents United Network advocate. And Residents United Network worked tirelessly throughout the campaign to make sure that Measure ULA passed. It was quite a ride. I started out as a homeless person, and I took a class on public speaking. And I have worked my way up to being a commissioner on Measure ULA. I went to a lot of meetings. I went to a lot of meetings in Washington, D.C., throughout the community. I spoke at the Assembly and helped change laws in California, because Residents United Network is the only network in the state of California that actively changes laws. We construct laws, we lobby for the laws, and we have changed housing laws in California. And we're the only organization that is
I'm so sorry, everyone. It looks like we're having some technical difficulties. We had a little internet issue at the office earlier. I don't know if that's what's causing it, but bear with us and hopefully we'll get our speakers back in a moment.
I am still here if you want me to try and go.
I'm also able to go, as I would be next.
Oh, there you go.
Go ahead, Madeline.
Yeah, excellent. Well, hello, everybody. Happy Thursday. Oh, Emily is back. Let's hand it on over to Emily.
Okay. So it's not too much more. So anyway, I got to meet some great people. I got to meet the mayor. I was on a town hall with her. I was the MC. And I want to say that Chris Bone from the Run program, he worked on the Bernie Sanders campaign as regional campaign director, worked tirelessly to make this bill a law. And I think actually without his help, we wouldn't have made it because he kept all of the Run members active in the organization. And he also advanced us from a regional state to a state city. And then we advanced from a state city to Washington, D.C. last year at the National Low Housing Income Coalition Conference in March. So it's been quite a ride, and I had a great time. And looking forward to the next questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emily. And yeah, Measure ULA that Emily was a leader in the campaign for is just so transformative in terms of new housing resources for the city of Los Angeles. So excited to dig in even further there with the questions and really appreciate you taking the time to be here. All right, I will pass it over to Madeline.
Well, hello, everybody. Again, my name is Madeline Hammerland, she, her. I am the housing campaign organizer for the Our Future Starts at Home campaign, which is a statewide coalition. And we are housing champions and leaders, advocates, and storytellers who believe that Minnesotans, no matter what we look like or where we come from, we should belong to safe and healthy homes. Next slide, please. And that's why we're proposing something bold like a Minnesota constitutional amendment. We know that we have a statewide housing challenge, and we need a statewide systemic approach to fund the solutions that exist or need to exist for a safe and healthy future for all of us, no matter our age, our income, or our language. Well, how do we actually generate this dedicated funding? We are proposing a sales tax, which is 0.375%. Altogether, this would generate about $440 million. And one of the reasons we're proposing that sales tax here in Minnesota is in 2008, we passed a Minnesota amendment to support parks, natural spaces, and the arts. Again, that sales tax is 0.375%. Another reason we're proposing it is because of leaders like Colorado who passed the Prop 123, making sure that they have dedicated funding statewide as well. Some of us will ask, well, what does 0.375% look like in your pocket? It looks like 37 cents going to neighbors and family every time you spend $100. Imagine 37 cents and giving that to your neighbor to make sure that they are safe and healthy. I know that's something I can do, and I believe Minnesotans will vote their values again. But it's not just about creating generating dedicated statewide funding for housing solutions every year. It's actually about changing the system. We know that our housing system was built with bias. And so we have an opportunity to bring in new funds and voices that are needed to change our housing system. This includes individuals with lived experience, tribal and indigenous representatives, disability advocates, and individuals with disabilities. We know that there are barriers to housing, such as accessible and affordability needs. We also know that our housing needs to be culturally responsive and culturally inclusive. And so we have an opportunity to bring in leaders into our housing system in a new way. So those $440 million will focus on a couple different approaches, and I'd love to share those in the next slide. So we're approaching improving the housing system by using and engaging informed, diverse housing experiences and expertise, and through three overlapping approaches. The Home Ownership Opportunity Fund is to address a statewide systemic issue in racial disparities in home ownership. White Minnesotans own property at a much higher rate than Minnesotans of color, and that's wrong. And we're champions and we're leaders, and we know we need to do something. When we think about the Rental Opportunity Fund, we're going to engage those funds in preventative strategies, which we know is most effective, making sure that our shelters are funded, making sure that we have emergency rental assistance, utilities are paid. And when we think about the Household and Community Stability Fund, that's about developing more affordable housing, more affordable rental units, and ensuring that we're prepared for the future by making sure that repairs and new developments are climate resilient and sustainable. Currently within the coalition, we are building organizational endorsements. We know that there are powerful networks that are already here in our state, and we're looking to activate those individuals, neighbors, and networks across all counties and of course across our state. We welcome insight, voices, and power. We have three committees, one focused specifically on making sure that we have statewide organizing power, making sure that we're bringing legislators in as partners and housing champions and advocates, and ensuring that we are guided by those who have lived experience and are housing user experts. So making sure that we have those with lived experience guiding every decision that we make. We recently held a Mankato town hall in which we welcomed 60 individuals and legislators and storytellers to talk about the housing crisis. If you go into the next slide, this is just a thank you for welcoming us into this space. We know that when we gather together, people are powerful. And so I am so pleased to be here, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And something I love about this campaign is it's not just about passing a law, but it's about putting something in the Constitution. I think that's just a really fundamental expression of how housing is so essential to our lives and should be embedded in the way that our government is structured in that really fundamental level. So thank you so much for being here. I will turn it over to Zach.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for the shout out. So I was on the campaign team for Proposition 123, which was a housing ballot measure that passed in 2022, which dedicated 0.1% of income tax to housing, which is about $300 million a year. Because of the way Colorado works, it wasn't actually a tax increase. It was just allocating existing funds towards housing, which was good for us at the ballot, I think, because we didn't have to tell people we were raising taxes. That's a very strange mechanism that only exists in Colorado, I think, but relevant because we only won by 6 points, which feels really good. But we also, we won by 6 points without a tax increase, which I think is just an important note to have. The Prop 123 address the entire spectrum of housing is what we referred to it as, which is everything from homelessness to homeownership and everything in between. And it also addressed a wide range of area median incomes. So we had programs that were set at 60% of AMI, programs at 90%, and then programs at 100%. The reason for that is because we wanted to, of course, focus the funding on individuals who are below 100% AMI, below the average, income in our state. But we wanted to make sure that there was something that everyone, or at least a lot of people, could see themselves in. And the best way to do that is to make sure that you're actually addressing the spectrum. So the spectrum that we focused on is we created a set of funds that's specifically for homeless prevention and resolution that didn't have a lot of strings on it. So opportunity for the state and advocates to say what it is that they think is needed, and in order to give it enough space to be innovative. So in this first couple of years, it'll be going to rental assistance programs, but it could change over time depending on what is most needed at the time. There's three sets actually of funds that go towards rentals development. One is a land banking program that assists nonprofits and local governments with purchasing of land, which they can hold for a period of time, 5 to 10 years, to then be able to build more affordably on that land by not having to pay for the land costs, and also being able to hold the land as an asset for a period of time. There's also a debt program that is concessionary debt, not super innovative, 2.5% interest rates that affordable housing developers can access if they're building at an average AMI of 60%. And then our more innovative idea is a large portion of the funds go towards an equity program where the state will actually become an equity investor in affordable housing developments. This is a really important one, because if you can increase equity investment in affordable housing developments, you can significantly drive down the cost of ownership for the developers, because they have to take out less debt, they have to service less debt. It makes a really big difference. The other thing is that it allows the state to actually get returns on those dollars. And we created a program written into law called the Tenant Equity Vehicle, which means that all of the profits that the state brings in from the 2.5% interest rate on the debt program and any equity returns that they get from the equity properties will go directly back to renters. So the principal will go back into the fund and be recycled year over year. But the profit will actually go back to renters, which we're anticipating will be about $1,000 a year for people who live in our equity funded buildings, which is going to be a major driver of economic opportunity in Colorado once we start getting these buildings built. One other thing I wanted to flag, kind of in the spirit of helping people who are in future campaigns, one of the things that we found in our polling is that there's a really big difference in people's minds between affordable housing and housing that's affordable. And so if you talk about housing affordability, it polls really well. But for some reason, I think we can all make our assumptions. The term affordable housing comes with stigma that is hard to overcome without significant funding to get your message out there. So we kind of transformed our campaign as we launched to start talking about making Colorado affordable and talking about the crisis of housing affordability rather than the need for affordable housing. And it just, who knows if it was the difference maker, but we won. So I guess that's a good sign. But happy to chat with anyone. I could talk about this stuff forever. So happy to share my information around.
Thanks so much, Zach. And yeah, I think that's so powerful. It's such a subtle shift from housing affordability to making Colorado affordable, and yet that shift can have such an impact on the outcome. So that's, I think, a really helpful insight. All right, so I'm going to bring back our full panel for some Q&A. Again, please feel free to submit questions in the Q&A box. I'd love to have some audience questions in there. But I will kick us off with a question, which is, so there's so many housing needs, there's a million different policy issues that you could put on the ballot, but how did you and your coalitions choose to pursue a ballot measure on this specific issue, and which community members will benefit? Issue or set of issues, knowing that many of them are kind of multifaceted.
I'll go.
Emily, do you want to get started?
Okay, sure. To be honest, everybody knows Los Angeles has a bit of a housing problem, just like up north, and it's terrible. And I'm quite sure that the citizens of Los Angeles decided to take control and end this in a way where we have a continuous supply and revenue that does not have to be voted on every 4 or 5 years. And that is the beauty part about Measure ULA. It has to be voted out. So there you are right there. If it's a working program, the community is going to want to keep it. Now, the people that benefit, the reason we really started thinking about it is because of COVID-19. We have a lot of people in Los Angeles on the street on a good day, but we were looking at all of these people who got the moratorium on their rent and their mortgages that were about to hit the streets too. And to be honest with you, we just really can't afford that. So we came up with an idea. And not only that, we were right in the middle of a lot of construction from Proposition H and HHH that, due to time limits because of COVID, funding ran out. So the properties are sitting there almost complete, but can't get the funding now. So this is the two main things Measure ULA addresses. Getting these people that were at risk of losing their homes because of the moratorium secure housing, and get those buildings built so we can get people off the street. Now, what it is $4 million on any property or any transfer in the city of Los Angeles is a 5% tax. Any property over $10 million, is a 4% tax. Any property over $10 million, $5 million to $10 million or and up, is a 5% tax. One time on the sales and transfer of that property. Consequently, it's the continuing revenue that will come in specifically to Measure ULA. And because we work with the city and the community at large, we have the city is involved. The mayor has given us resources with some city employees that help guide us through the laws. And we also have the community that is directing us in their desires and what they want to see come out of Measure ULA, while we fulfill those two main objects first. And those others would be getting people off the street, helping students, disabled, seniors, and vets. That's our priorities in whatever order they come in. They're accepting applications now for relief in the program. This year, and we got started a little late, but this year, we hope to generate $1.1 billion in revenue. And that's just our first year. Now, the mayor, I said, has been more than generous. She has supplied employees from the city to help direct us. Also, she has supplied $150 million for us to get a jump start because, unfortunately, we're in court. It shouldn't be all against the law to have affordable housing and end homelessness. But we are in court. And the mayor, when I did that, when I was the MC, she said that she would cooperate. She wasn't necessarily for the law, but if it did pass, she would cooperate and do her very best to help see that this law was a success. So that we have going for us. And then as far as people we have grassroots individuals in Los Angeles on every corner, feeding people, giving people everything that you need to live, other than a home, because we don't have it. We don't have any land. We don't have anything. And some stuff has to be built new, and some stuff can be retrofitted. But that's the main goal of Measure ULA, and it's citizen made. Once we got the commission up, and we had our first meeting was on ethics and cybercrime. And then from then on, we started taking what the bill says and breaking it down to make it and allocate monies to that part of the law. And right now, that's what we're in the process of doing, the first, I don't know, 3-4 months of this. And it's exciting. And I can't say that I'm looking forward to it because I had a little of a circumstance and I was forced to resign. But we can go into that later if you want to.
Oh my gosh, Emily. Well, that is wonderful. If it's okay, I'd just love to piggyback off of that a little bit. We're also in the place of real coalition building. I mean, the campaign is built on uplifting rural voices. We know that in rural spaces, there are unique challenges, and that means that we need unique solutions. So bringing in those voices, those perspectives, that expertise, making sure that we are lifting up racial equity in all of our work. So we are very, I would say, focused and mindful of the organizations that we're approaching to make sure that we bring in all the needed perspectives to change our housing system and also build a powerful campaign. We're approaching individuals and people who are focused on making sure that we also have equitable education outcomes, equitable healthcare outcomes. We know that housing is at the center of so many people's lives. And so we're also focusing on breaking out of just housing spaces and connecting with leaders and experts and advocates in other areas throughout Minnesota, because that is how we know we will most likely win. But primarily our coalition is built around housing advocates and champions that already exist within our state. And Zach, I am really happy that you're in this same room because Colorado is a leader that we look to as a state as we're proposing the constitutional amendment for housing. And so a lot of our work is coalition built through conversations, and then just creating a welcoming, inclusive, equitable a coalition. So yeah, thank you. That's how we're building.
I'll just jump in and say super quickly that we came from like a little bit of a different direction for why we chased housing, which was that we put a poll out probably back in 2020 that was like, what are your biggest concerns? And 88% of Coloradans said that housing was a serious concern when they were given the option of serious concern, not a concern. Like, and 88% of people said it was a serious concern. The other thing is that we had come to the conclusion, like, you know, it's no surprise it's California, Minnesota, and Colorado in this conversation. This is where like housing is having major problems. We're not alone. But one of the huge things we talked about is actually like Colorado is on pace to become California. And it's not as bad here as it is there, but actually if we do nothing, it could be. Because we would tell people if we keep at this pace, then we're going to end up with a median household price that's $1.5 million in the next 10 years, which sounds mind blowing. And then you find out that that's exactly where San Francisco and LA are, which then makes it feel very, very real.
Yeah, and I like to jump in here about sort of, I think the thing that excites me the most about the regional bond campaign is just BAFA as an entity. So that's the Bay Area Housing Finance Authority that I outlined on how there was like a bunch of case making that was done to create the self-sustaining model. Because in the Bay Area, it's a very regional problem, and we have been trying to piecemeal like different bonds, state jurisdiction by jurisdiction, and the idea of creating this region-wide model that could potentially become self-sustaining. And you know, we look to our friends in New York for their guidance. I think that's what the exciting is, like the framework of how the bond came to be is what is exciting to me about sort of like where we're at with the regional bond. And this is, and if we have this like a extremely amount of investment, it could actually make a huge impact across the region in areas that have struggled in creating more housing. and in financing housing.
Yeah, thank you all. I feel like the sustainability of the resource and, not needing to keep seeking new funding, but having something that's baked in is a common theme that I'm hearing about how you all kind of chose these specific measures. Question from Daisy, I think directed to Madeline, but I think probably anyone could speak to this. In Oregon, we're trying to balance the need for more housing units overall, good stewardship of public dollars, and figuring out if public dollars are best spent on creating more units overall, which tend to be rental as that is more cost efficient, or creating more home ownership and wealth building opportunities. Do you have any thoughts on the best frame to think about this and facilitate these community conversations?
Yeah, well, I'll share, and I think everybody within the panel has an idea about. I think, first of all, we all recognize we need diverse approaches to improving our housing systems nationwide. People are experiencing economic, racial, accessibility barriers. And those are very real. And so one of the big things that we as a campaign are doing is within spaces that we're invited to, we're spending a lot of that time listening. So we're gaining regional data, city-based data, organizational-based data, and mission, as I would say. And we're trying to understand what are the housing needs that Minnesotans already know, and how do we also bring those in to guide our campaign? It's very critical to the work that we're doing. The way that the campaign or the amendment is proposed is we have both. A lot of the funding that will be generated every year is really focused on preventative services. But again, we have two separate funds. One is focused on home ownership. Zach brought up, which I think is so real, is creating multi-generational wealth. And for so many, we know that that's what housing provides. And so we want communities across our state to have access to that, especially those that have been left out and left behind. But we know that one of the best ways to create stability is rental that is affordable for all. And so we believe that when we have this consistent, dedicated fund, we'll be able to close those gaps.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to weigh in on this question?
Anyone who wants to talk about the tenant equity vehicle, I think, please reach out, because I really think that, yes, we need home ownership. We have to address the entire spectrum. There's just not enough. We're nowhere near what we need to have enough affordable rentals right now. So my answer to the question is, at least in Colorado, we're decades behind on affordable rentals. And so we really need to focus on building that up, because people need a place to live right now. But there are really, really innovative ways to make it, especially with state funded dollars, that equity can actually be transferred to renters in this process. So it's mind changing, I think, because we always think about ownership as the way in which you build equity, but it doesn't have to be that way. And renters are the people who create the value of a rental unit. And so therefore they should share in that prosperity. And there's ways to do it.
Yeah, I love that framing. And there doesn't need to be this trade-off between wealth building and long-term stability and renting. I really, really love that. We got a question from Marina about Puerto Rico, noting that in Puerto Rico, there is a lot of conversion to Airbnbs that is affecting the supply of rental housing. So kind of a two-part question from that. Do any of your ballot measures take this issue into consideration? And then a question, Zach, I don't want to put you on the spot because I'm not sure if you had worked on this, but I know there were a lot of local ballot measures in Colorado that addressed short-term rentals more specifically. So if you have any kind of insights into those, would welcome you sharing, but also knowing that that was a little bit separate from Proposition 123. Emily, do you want to get us started?
Yeah, this didn't happen in this measure, but when I first started to be an advocate around 2016, 17, at the assembly, I spoke about this and it was passed. We added a gas tax, and everybody's paying for it to help the homeless. But anybody that owns more than one home in California pays a tax to homelessness on the other homes that they own. Not the first home, but the adjoining, because a lot of people here got a lot of homes. And that's the ones, private homes, and that's the ones that are taxed a percentage. And I thought that was a good idea. And it passed. And it slipped in, and like the gas tax, they're paying. You know, inch by inch is a cinch, and yard by yard is hard.
Cool. Zach.
Yeah, our bill did not address short-term rentals, but Colorado has been doing a lot of work around this. I think the reason for that is because we have to vote on every tax increase in Colorado. So I think you see it at a national level, you see these are happening everywhere, but that's because our city councils just can't pass them themselves. And they're a good way to raise revenues because it only affects a small number of people. And it's a good way to help housing. But we did not specifically focus on this in our measure, though all of the rental units that are funded through Prop 123, of course, would not be able to be a short-term rental.
Yeah, and just very quick, just
go
very
ahead,
quickly about
Edley.
short-term rentals. I just wanted to say that the city of Oakland did pass a short-term rental regulation that it's actually pretty strict. There's like a whole database. There's like a whole mechanism to enforce it. And EBHO had been. I mean, it took years to get to this point. There were like illegal Airbnbs everywhere. There was no actual regulation for it. Now there's a regulation, and EBHO was involved in crafting that through. And then I think we also saw in New York City that's also popping up as well. So short-term rentals can decrease the housing availability. So.
Yeah, and I'll put in a plug for reading our ballot measures report from last year, because there's a whole section on ballot measures to regulate or tax short-term rentals, and a lot of details on how those policies were pursued and the successes of those campaigns.
I'd like to say that the laws that we passed, those laws that I suggested, they were formulated by the Residents United Network at our annual symposium, where we come up with 3 laws, and we lobby those laws all year long, and sometimes we pass them, but most of the time we don't. But that doesn't mean that we don't stop. We continue until they pass. I've been there since 2016, and we're working on 2 and still working on it this year, because we're going to get these passed somehow, some way, because they're important. So.
Yeah,
But that's what we do at Residents United Network. It ought to be a law. That's the name of the program.
Absolutely. And that is a perfect segue actually to my next question. And I know some of you have kind of touched upon this already, but can elaborate further. What is the role of directly impacted people in your campaigns?
Yeah, I would love to share. So the role of people who are directly impacted, I think one of the things is we're all Minnesotans, all people are impacted by the housing system, whether it benefits them more or impacts them more negatively. When we think about those that are experiencing more barriers, those are definitely voices that we are lifting up and listening to more heavily and welcoming, I would say, in a more intentional way. In what I shared, we do have a lived experience. So individuals with lived experience with homelessness advisory committee. And this is in addition to all the other campaign spaces that was actually requested by the leaders of the campaign. Just to make sure that they have an opportunity to connect with one another, and also make sure that there is a very specific space where their perspectives and voices are listened to and responded to. We are definitely building that space heavily. But another community we're really connecting with would include the rural voices in the rural communities. When we think about the need for workforce housing, when we think about culturally responsive communities. So I would say that we are putting in efforts. And one of the things that I get to share all the time, as a coalition, we can do better and we can do more. And I think that that is one of the things that we're continuously practicing.
Yeah, one of the lessons learned of some past ballot measure disappointments has been that if you don't bring along the people with you from the beginning, you'll have a harder time when it's at the ballot. So one of the things that we are working on is that while we are working to pass the ballot, or sorry, the bond, we're also working on crafting expenditure plans about how that money is going to be spent. And as a priority, EBHO is advocating for impacted communities, extremely low income, and advocating around expenditure plans in all the jurisdictions, and also bringing along our residents and other of our community members in conversations about what they want the money to be spent on once it does get passed. And the expenditure plan doesn't come until after the bond gets passed. So first, we all have to be excited about how much money, but we also have to plug people into conversations about expenditure plans from the get-go, not after it passes.
Okay, well, in Measure Unite Los Angeles, that's the official title of the measure. Measure ULA. Unite is the key word. Not only unite the community, but the unions. Every housing is going to be union made. That way we get to bring the community together. We're going to promote. Los Angeles went through a pandemic and a riot. And guess what? It looks like it did. It's run down. It looks old. Buildings need paint. Let's get the community prettied up. If you want to have, we got Measure ULA, community councils need to get busy and get the funds to improve the community to match the new homes that are coming in, and have pride in your community, because that's what Unite ULA is all about. We're affiliated with the United Way and the unions, the ACLU, providers throughout Los Angeles, and there are no funds from the government. None. It's all generated from the tax. So there's no Section 8 at all. And that's the way it is. And no Salvation Army or anything like that. It's a structured plan for the revenue from the tax.
Thank you. We got another question in the chat on getting more information on ownership for low-income people. And Zach, I know that was something that you had mentioned you're really passionate about. I don't know if there's some more details that you could share on that topic right now.
Sorry, I was trying to find unmute. Sorry, the question was about how do you get people into homeownership?
Yeah, or just where someone who is low income, who's looking for ownership opportunities, can get more information.
Yeah, so I'm probably not the best person to answer this question. In Colorado, the way that it generally works for our state funding is that the state will partner with local nonprofits and local nonprofit developers who develop the homeownership units, and then they sell them as income restricted units just on the market, basically. So it would be through like the Colorado Department of Housing, probably. But one of the things that the tenant equity vehicle, just to keep going back to it because I'll never stop, is that you can use all that money that you get back in order to potentially purchase a home. So say if you live in the rental unit for 5 years, you could raise a down payment. But
I'm super interested, if we have time and there's no other question, to hear more about it, just like from a basic level, because I mean, this is among the first times I've heard anything about this, but if there's other questions, we could also answer those.
I have one specific question that's probably pretty short, and then we could spend maybe 2 or so minutes on this. Carrie asked if any of your models include ownership options for those below 50% of area median income.
Honestly, in Colorado, that doesn't really exist. So there is funding in Prop 123 to support modular development, which is probably the only way that's going to happen. There's also land banking opportunities, and Colorado has a program that I'm not sure if other states have to help support individuals who live in modular home parks to purchase the land underneath their unit. So that's not related to Prop 123, but yeah, those from the most part don't exist in Colorado.
Thanks. And I see Anna has something to share on this, but is driving. So Anna, feel free to follow up with me by email, and I can connect you with the person who asked this question. Thank you.
Yeah, and I could just chime in a little bit about home ownership and what that means, like for our regional bond and for BAFA. And there's like the idea of BAFA is that it has to follow a 3Ps approach. And then within that, there have been talks and explorations about there's like a chunk of money that goes return to source, the majority that goes back to where it came from, and then there's like 20% that stays within BAFA as the entity. And they're still in the process of figuring out all the guardrails and how they're going to be, what framework they're going to be using for that 20%. And one of the things that people have been exploring is the idea of home ownership, especially targeting people who have, Black Americans have been historically redlined and disenfranchised, et cetera, to prioritize that. But conversations are ongoing, and that's why it's really important for people to chime in at these meetings. Because decision makers are making decisions every single day, and they're getting informed about how they're going to operate in that from the money that comes in from the regional bond. So,
thank you. We did get a question for Emily specifically to talk about the court experience. I think maybe referring to the lawsuit. I'm not 100% sure though. Okay.
Yeah, to the lawsuit. Right after, of course, we have factions that have cute little names that I believe, well, they must make money because they like to see homeless people. They don't want to end homelessness. And they're very strong in Los Angeles. And what was the question? Because I had to say that first. So the question was
about the lawsuit.
So anyway, as soon as the bill passed by the city voters of Los Angeles, we were taken to court because it's unconstitutional. And because Los Angeles is a big city, it encompasses some cities by the beach. It encompasses some cities where I live. I'm about 20 miles from the beach. It's a big city. And this is all the little cities in Los Angeles that are not incorporated, like Burbank and Beverly Hills and the big cities, okay? One of the cities that is affected is Pacific Palisades. And a lot of those people that live there, movie stars, don't want to pay the tax. And a lot of those movie stars sold their homes before the law became effective, so they didn't have to pay the tax. And that's good. But now they don't want to pay the tax, so they took us to court. I don't know the details of it. I just know that I don't think that's right. People should be allowed to have a home. Children should not live on the street. People should not ride on the train with IV poles in their arms. This is not a civilized way to live. And to be honest, the people of Los Angeles are sick of looking at it. But the politicians, and I believe it's intimidation and subliminally, you walk out the door and you go, my God, that could be me, are intimidated by it too.
Yeah.
Because of those agencies that want you to be intimidated. I have been told by those other agencies that I did not have a right to speak because I was homeless.
Mm.
because a lot of homeless people don't know that. So they try to intimidate you.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so much attempting. Thank you for sharing that. And I think we've seen with a lot of ballot measures, when the people support something that is needed for the community, the people who lost at the ballot box will then turn around and sue to prevent it from going into effect. We've seen this in a lot of places. But it is a story with a happy ending because a judge just dismissed that lawsuit a few days ago, which is really exciting.
It's wonderful. It's wonderful.
Yeah, so we are at time now. That I think that's an optimistic note to end on. And just before we go, I have just a quick reminder / announcement that to get these measures across the finish line, to show the political will for housing solutions, it is of course critical that everyone on this call who cares so deeply is registered and turns out to vote. So make sure that you confirm your voter registration. Make sure that you know about have a plan to vote in your community. And again, we really appreciate you all being here. We really appreciate all of the panelists for your insights. I think this is just the beginning of an ongoing conversation. And you can always find resources for your own voter engagement campaigns at ourhomes-ourvotes.org. Thank you all so much. Have a good rest of the day.